Here we come to the Second War poet. His name is Wilfred Owen, and again, it is necessary for us to take into consideration some of his biographical information in order to understand his poetic production. As you can see from your book on page 234, Owen was born in 1893 and died in 1918. He was a teacher and was teaching English in France when he visited a hospital for wounded soldiers of World War I, and it was in that very moment that he decided to join the war. Therefore, he volunteered in the British Army and enlisted for the war. He was later injured and therefore sent to a hospital in Edinburgh to recover from the shell shock, so that condition of psychological shock that was experienced by many soldiers who took part in the war. So here at the hospital he met Siegfried Sassoon, who was also a patient and had already an important reputation as a poet. Sassoon convinced Owen to continue writing his poems. So he actually understood that Owen had some kind of poetic capacities. It was in this period that he wrote his most brilliant poems. He died on the 4th of November, just a few days before the armistice. These poems are a very realistic, clear representation of the experience of the war, of the horrible experience of soldiers in the trenches. He used lots of assonances, alliterations, metaphors, onomatopoeic words, so lots of different devices in order to make poetry more adequate to express a completely different content. For the first time in poetry, horrible situations, the painful and awful conditions, physical and psychological conditions of human beings during the war became content of poetry. Therefore, he thought that the language, the poetic language used until that moment was not proper, was not adequate to speak about such a harsh and heavy content. To the preface of the collection of poems, he wrote this. Here you've got an extract. He said, "Above all, this book is not concerned with poetry. The subject of it is war and the pity of war, where pity means the compassion, the capacity of feeling sympathetic, emotionally sympathetic to the feelings and emotions of someone else. The poetry is in the pity, yet these elegies, and elegies are usually poems, compositions for dead people, are not to this generation. This is in no sense consolatory. So he didn't intend poetry to be consolatory, to be a consolation. He thought that no consolation could be found in poetry at that time, in literature or anywhere at that time. They may be to the next. All the poet can do today is to warn. This is why the true poets must be truthful." So in Owen's opinion, the poet's mission was to talk about reality, to tell the truth, even though the truth could be or could appear horrible, awful and painful. His condition and his mission was to warn people so that the same things could not happen again. Now we are going to analyze the poem. This is one of the best known poem by Owen that you can find also on your book. The poem is not particularly easy because it uses quite difficult and technical words, and this is also the poetic capacity and skill of Owen himself in manipulating the poetic devices. So we are going to read every stanza, try to make an Italian translation, and then an analysis which will concentrate on the most difficult and important words of the poem. Dulce Decorum Est. The poem was written in 1917 and then was published in the collection in 1920, And this is based on Owen's personal experience of trench warfare, so on a personal subjective experience. Bent double like old beggars under sex, knock-kneed, laughing like hags. We cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men much asleep, many had lost their boots, limped on bloodshot. All went lame or blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Okay, so in the first line, we can see that the poet is addressing the soldiers, and among the soldiers he finds himself. In fact, he uses the pronoun we. So he includes himself in the group of soldiers, of the British soldiers now in the trenches. These soldiers are described as bent double, piegati in due, come vecchi mendicanti sotto i loro sacchi, con le ginocchia che si toccavano, che tossivano come delle vecchiacce, maledivano, bestemmiavano attraverso quel fango, finché i razzi, i segnali razzo, si trovavano dietro alle loro spalle, alle loro schiene, e loro quindi, volgendo le spalle a questi segnali, andavano verso il luogo distante in cui si potevano trovare riposo e salvezza, e cominciavano a camminare con difficoltà, uomini che marciavano come se fossero addormentati. Molti di loro avevano perso le scarpe, ma continuavano a zoppicare con i piedi pieni di sangue. Tutti zoppicavano, tutti sembravano accecati, ubriachi di stanchezza, sordi anche al rumore delle granate di gas che cadevano lievemente dietro di loro. So these soldiers are described as bent double, like old beggars. The soldiers were obviously young people, young men, probably in their 20s. Despite this, they are described as old people. Old because of the tiredness, because they are very tired, because they are exhausted. They are so tired and exhausted that their knees knock together, so they can't walk properly because of the fact that they are tired. They cough like hags, probably so they are also ill. They curse through the sludge. So a hag is a hideous old woman, probably a witch. So the poet is talking about young men, but he uses words to describe them as old people. What is sludge? Sludge is a horrible half liquid and half solid mud, usually smelling mud. So the poet doesn't just say mud, he uses sludge. He tries to appeal to different senses, the sight, the smell, and even touch, to give a more complete idea of the environment and conditions in which these soldiers are living. They turned their backs to the haunting flares. The haunting flares had been shot by the German army, by the enemies probably. So if you watch this image, you can get an idea of how the front lines looked like. So probably that was the German trench, the line of the German trench, and here in front of it you had the line of the British trench. In between there was a called no man's land, so a part of the land onto which no man would venture, would walk. But in this place, haunting flares, so signals which usually anticipated an attack, were shot. And then also, obviously, other weapons were shot. So the poet describes the soldier as they are probably leaving the British trenches. So they are probably returning, coming back in this direction, because they have been in the battle in the trenches. That is why they are so exhausted and so tired. And they are living and going back to the place of distant rest, which is a place where they can find rest, they can find shelter, rifugio, where they can keep safe. And while they're moving away from the trench towards the distant rest, obviously they are turning their backs to the trenches and their face to the place of distant rest. So this is probably the movement that he is describing. So he uses again another technical word that is trudge. While they are moving towards the place of distant rest, they trudge. He doesn't say just walk, they trudge. That means to walk very heavily because they are very tired, or even because they are walking through a difficult ground. Probably here is both meanings are meant. And again, they march as if they were asleep, or as if they were zombies, a kind of anticipation of their future, that is to say, death. Many of them have lost their boots in the battle, but despite this, they continue to walk. And again, he uses a verb, to limp, which is a word which tries to convey the idea of incapacity of walking properly. Here we've got the expression bloodshod. It's a kind of invented expression. Shod stands for shoes, scarpe. In English, there's the expression well shod. If you are well shod, that means that you've got expensive shoes, that you are wearing expensive shoes, so that you are well dressed, probably you are well off, probably you are a rich person. Here the people are bloodshod. That means that instead of boots, they've got blood on their feet. The only shoe, the only thing that covers their feet is blood. Everybody went lame. Lame is another verb, very significant verb, because it is used more for animals rather than for human beings. And it is used for animals that can't walk properly, especially cows who can't walk properly. So this is because probably he is trying to give the idea that these soldiers have lost the condition of human beings. It's a beastly condition, that of war. They have become animals. They are drunk with fatigue, drunk with tiredness. Fatigue means tiredness, extreme tiredness. And deaf to the hoots, probably because of the bombs, because of the weapons they have heard during the battle. They have become deaf. So these are the physical effects of the war on their bodies. So they can't even hear, probably, the gas shells, the gas grenade, which have just been shot by the German enemies. Or even the gas shells seem to be tired, seem to be slow, therefore they drop, they fall softly behind them. So, concluding, we can say that the first stanza, it's a description of soldiers, British soldiers, returning, getting back from the battle. And among the soldiers, the protagonist includes himself. They are retreating from the trenches into their place of rest. They are terribly exhausted, injured because they've got blood. The poet uses strong, harsh, difficult words, and the soldiers appear more like old men and beasts rather than young men.